Well, welcome to another Swedenborgian Community Online service. Thank you for joining us today. We are quite honored to have a special guest today, Reverend Kit Billings of the LaPorte New Church. Welcome, Reverend.
Thanks very much, Cory. I'm really glad to be here and looking forward to our discussion tonight.
Well, we are really excited to chat with you. I'm sure many in the community know of you, have probably met you at the annual convention or something else. And I'm excited just to connect with you because you've been a real support in my journey, and I can only thank you. I can't thank you enough, actually. So thank you.
Well, you're most welcome. It truly is a joy. And a very meaningful part of my journey of life, and especially as a minister, to be a part of your journey, Cory, and as well as many other people's. I feel very honored to be chair of our committee on admission into the ministry at this point, but especially just to have face-to-face personal interactions with many people.
Yeah, you're impassioned, passionate about connecting with people and supporting people on their journey to ministry, and it's very many guises.
It really is, and I know it kind of goes without saying, but I truly owe everything to God, who I feel has really been with me and really with everyone in a very deep and personal way, oftentimes invisibly. But I can look back on my whole life journey, going back to my childhood, and just remember, those special, I would say soft, mystical moments when I first started to have some experience of the divine.
Really, through soft mystical moments. Can you tell us a little more about that?
Yeah. Well, I guess for me personally, my story really would begin generations before my birth. It just so happens that on both sides of my family, on my mother's side and my dad's side, Swedenborgian people and actually ministers go back 4 generations now. Yeah, which even to my ears, even at the age of 51, when I say that, it just kind of boggles my mind, to be honest. But when I look back over my early life journey, I would say it meant a lot to me that both of my parents they've always been open-minded people and spiritually open. Not the sort of people that are narrow in their thinking and like more on the judgmental side, but just truly they both have always had this just kind of a gentle, soft, spiritual energy is what I would refer to it as, or mindset. And so that's the kind of spirit that I grew up in. And I think that is what helped me, even though I wasn't aware of it, just to be kind of open and sensitive as a boy to these really lovely experiences that would happen now and then. And for me, the first one that I can consciously think of is it was when I was in the 3rd grade, and I was attending an alternative school in the Bay Area. We were living in El Cerrito, California. And the name of the school was actually called Muji Ubu. Which,
what was that?
I know, it sounds like something out of a novel, but the school, it was a Native American word.
Wow.
In English, it sounded like Muji Ubu. And what it meant was magical revolution.
That's amazing.
Yeah. And so this was a private school. And, there weren't a huge amount of children and so forth, but it was a decent size and a more alternative approach to education. But one day, just out of the blue, I've always been kind of sensitive, I guess, to thunderstorms and rainstorms. And this one day, I just happened to be outside, just hanging out during a recess by myself. And it was raining. It was kind of a steady, gentle rain, and there was a lot of wind that was blowing around. And totally unbidden, I was standing outside just really being enraptured by the experience and the feeling of it all. And then all of a sudden, all I can say is that I had this very conscious feeling deep down inside that there was a much greater presence or spirit than I was.
Wow.
It seemed to, my experience as a boy was that it just was everywhere. And this presence or energy or force, you might say, it just had a really loving and very, very peaceful sense to it. And I'm not kidding. I literally stood there for probably 10 minutes, and I just was just being totally enraptured in this wonderful moment. And I didn't really know at the time as a boy, I didn't quite understand what it was. But as I look back on it as an adult, and I've looked back on it for years now, and I would say that very, very special, very soothing, I would say kind of a healing moment was very, very poignant. And I think it meant a lot to me too, because as a kid, you kind of go around going in and out of, some anxiety and, wondering what's going to happen today and so forth. And when I was caught up in this moment, in that rainstorm, I can easily say that I felt 100% at peace.
Oh, yeah. Wow, that's amazing.
Yeah, it was a true gift as far as I'm concerned. And I believe that really was the first time in a more sort of conscious way that the divine really kind of intervened in my life journey and just touched my life in a very special way.
Yeah, I mean, I can't even imagine how you could respond to such an event, and yeah, I don't think, wow.
Well, and then here's the thing, Cory, that's so telling about it is that it was so deep and so like all encompassing to my being. I didn't even know how to talk about it. I didn't even tell anybody about it. But it was something that really touched my heart, and I would say my soul, in just a really beautiful way. And ever since then, I can say that really, practically, I think all of my personal moments or mystical moments with God and the Lord, they tend to have that kind of quality. It's just a very real, very, very personal, but usually, a very gentle, loving experience.
Yeah, so
I'm just thankful.
Go ahead. You're just thankful.
Yeah.
Yeah, that sounds about right. Wow.
Yeah.
it's kind of amazing that that's the presence that Divinity has approached you with, and that seems to be, from what I'm hearing from you, kind of a reoccurring theme of this peaceful, calming, uplifting, and all the terms you use, presence, that connects with you in this really deep and profound way, and in moments not of your choosing. You weren't seeking it. It doesn't sound like.
Yeah, and that really is a really consistent. Well, I would say in general that's a consistent element of them. I would also add to that there have been other times in my life when I really, for the reason of that, I really felt an incredible need to reach out to God, through like a prayerful moment, whether it be for myself or especially for other people. And clearly, in my nearly 25 years of ministry, there have just been so many times when I was blessed to be, like, let's say, at the bedside of a hospital patient, or it could be a time of great celebration, like during a wedding. So many times, really, when I reach out to God in conscious, intentional prayer, it's really just so simple and so beautiful. And I know billions of people can attest to this as well. But it's just wonderful how God responds, and it's it's not always in the most conscious of ways. Sometimes it's just a very simple feeling, a warm presence. But then other times it's very much as if, God is inspiring certain words to come through, like during a prayer.
Right.
I did spend 7 years of my ministry life as a professional chaplain. And so that, of course, that ushered the way into just so many very, very special, in a sense, life-altering moments when I could really feel God kind of working through me, and simply for the reason of wanting to help or to support, or in some way, shape, or form, to offer healing to somebody. And it may not be always in a physical healing, but it could have been in a way that, this person, let's say, was anxious or scared, or just really hurt by something, and how God, responds to our requests, our prayers, and flows through us at those times, and really touches people in a very beautiful way.
Yeah, healing is kind of the reoccurring theme. It sounds like of the divine presence and the divine hope for us is continued growth, continued healing, and as you said, not just physically, maybe not even especially physically, but emotionally, spiritually.
Right. Yeah, that really is most of the time, in my experience. At least that's my perception, and my feeling is that very much of the time, the healing comes in not necessarily a physical way. But I will say this: I'll add to that there have been times during my ministry journey, two of which happened during my time as a chaplain in a hospital, where the prayer and request for physical healing was actually answered in a most
Wow.
Yeah, it really is a wow.
Really?
It's a wow, like 1,000%.
Wow.
I mean, it actually surprised me. I did not, to be honest, I was not expecting God to in a sense, come through at that level. But it happened, and they were pure miracles in my book.
Really? Okay, we have to hear more about that.
So,
So, yeah, you weren't expecting a physical miracle, but you're saying that's happened at least a couple times before.
Did.
Can you tell us more?
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. Well, I was working at Bergen Mercy Medical Center in Omaha, Nebraska, which was a great place to work as a chaplain. And one of my areas of focus in the hospital was I was the lead, or you could say primary, perinatal chaplain. So anything going on with the patients or in the medical work that had to do with the pregnancy period of time or the birth period journey, or like let's say up to a year of the baby's life after birth, I would be the chaplain that was always being given confidential and very private information about this baby or that one. And so in our hospital we had a level 3 neonatal intensive care unit, and so that meant that there were 12 separate stations in this big room where there was usually, not always, but very often there was like a big incubator or just simply a very nicely arranged little bed for the baby, and all sorts of medical equipment that was around the baby and helping the baby to grow or to heal or simply to survive. And so as you can imagine, so we're getting infants coming into our NICU unit, is what we called it, the NICU. They're coming in fairly regularly, because Omaha has a large population, like 2 million people in the extended area.
Yeah.
And so I would very regularly, every week I would go into work and I would get to meet, these wonderfully loving and oftentimes very anxious parents whose very oftentimes the baby would be premature, and therefore its lungs, let's say, were not fully developed, or it could be the digestive system, or some aspect of the baby's life was threatened. And so this one time, I came into work one day and I immediately received an emergency request to come up to the NICU. So I responded right away, and I went up, and the charge nurse said, she said, "Kit, we've got a real serious patient over here, and it's a little baby girl who she's only, I think she said she was about 5 weeks premature, but she said that there's a life-threatening problem with her lungs. She said there's a large hole, like she said it was about the diameter of a nickel. She said there's a big hole in her lungs, and we're doing everything we can to sustain her and to keep her oxygenated, but it's not looking good." And she said, right now, the doctor in charge is at the bedside with the parents, and he's having an extremely serious conversation with them. So the nurse said, "Would you please just go in and introduce yourself and offer your ministerial or, your spiritual pastoral presence?" So I said, "Absolutely." And I went in quickly, and I got to stand there as the doctor was talking with the parents, and the doctor said, he said, I'm terribly, terribly sorry for needing to share this information with you, but your daughter is very likely not going to make it." And he explained the medical reality of her lungs. And then the doctor actually said to the parents, he said, said, and I'm just going to be totally upfront with you because I need to do this as your doctor. He said, I think now would be a reasonable time to begin making your thoughts and your plans for the disposition, for the burial of your daughter, because she's probably not going to make it, sometime overnight. She'll probably pass away. And of course, the parents were absolutely devastated and lots of tears, very emotional situation. And I've always been really close to my own tears and my own emotions, so I just stood there and I cried with them. And then the one of the parents, I believe, as I look back on it, it was the mother. She looked at me and she said, Chaplain, would you please try to arrange quickly for our daughter's baptism? And I said, absolutely. The reality, just for the listeners to know, is that in hospital settings, baptisms for anyone of any age are a very careful thing. We really only were allowed to do them under dire, life-threatening kinds of situations for various reasons, because baptism is a sacrament of the Christian faith, the Christian church, and so it was our job as chaplains to try to not usurp that sacred spiritual territory, you might say, or role of the organized church. But if a patient was in a dire situation, and if the parents requested, in this case, then of course, I can immediately, as a chaplain, I can respond positively to that request. So I explained to them, yes, it won't take me long. I just have to gather up a few things and get some sterilized water because of the baby's compromised immune system. And so I quickly got things arranged. I pulled together a very brief but very poignant baptism service, and I gave the parents copies, so they could participate in a responsive way. And I had all the documents. But the thing that's important is that the actual moment. So, the parents had a couple of other family members there, and I just asked everyone, would you please just join with me around her incubator? And I asked the parents' permission if I could touch the baby girl. And my hands were sterilized, of course, and they said absolutely. So I started out with a prayer, and we went into the service, and then, of course, came the big moment, of baptism. And what I can share is that there was a really very strong, palpable force that all of a sudden it just flowed right through me. As I was saying the words, let's say the baby's name was Jennifer Doe. And so I actually put my hand against her flesh. I believe it was right on her chest, because I knew that's where the hole was. And I didn't even pray especially for healing. What I did was primarily simply, I did my usual job, so to speak, of in a very faithful and very loving way. I simply honored their request, and I baptized the baby in God's love and spirit. And as I said the words, as I said, Jennifer Doe, let's say is her name, I baptize you in the name of the Father and the Son and the Holy Spirit. And I can feel even now as I tell you the story, it was this incredible flow of all I can say is it was like a divine energy that came through me, through my hand, and it just flowed right into the baby. But I did not expect, at that point, I did not expect for some miraculous healing to happen. I didn't think, to be honest with all of you that are listening, I really didn't think God was going to do that. For whatever reason, I just didn't expect it. Maybe that was important. But I did actually also incorporate the words. You know, I prayed that the Lord would not only touch her and bless her, but that he would heal her. And so the baptism happened. You know, it was an extremely powerful and very sensitive experience, very just unforgettable. But none of us expected anything really physical to happen. So we finished everything. I got their signatures. I gave them the certificate, and I made sure they had my contact information and that they could always, call for a chaplain 24 hours a day if needed. So we parted company. At that point, it was probably about 5 o'clock in the evening. And I went home, very kind of worn out in a good way. And went to bed that night, got up, came to work. And as soon as I entered the pastoral care office, there was a message for me. And the chaplain that was overnight on duty said, "Kit, they really want you to come back to the NICU right away." And that was it. That's all the message was. And I thought, oh gosh, I guess this little girl finally passed on. So I went up there and I entered the unit, and Cory, it was absolutely incredible. I mean, the whole room was, everybody was smiling, and some people were even laughing, and I went up to the bed, and the little girl, she just looked wonderful, and the doctor was there, the nurse was there, the charge nurse was standing there, and they looked at me, and they said, the actual doctor looked at me, and he said, "Chaplain, he said, from a medical standpoint, I cannot explain it, but something happened yesterday." And he said, this little girl's, the hole in her lungs is completely healed.
That's astounding.
It was an absolute
mind-blowing,
totally shocking experience. And I looked at the doctor and I said, "Did I hear you correctly? That the hole in her lungs is totally healed?" He said, "Yes, it is not there anymore." And he looked at all of us and he said, "You see, this this was a faith-based hospital." So every staff member in the hospital knew that it was totally sanctioned to incorporate spirituality, faith, and religion into the medical care of everyone. And so the doctor just said out loud, he said, "This is a real miracle."
That's such that I can't even. I don't have enough superlatives. Wow.
I know. That was.
And it's such a.
One of the most awesome experiences of my whole life. And to see after that, words are not enough. They hugged me, they kissed me, they said, "Chaplain, we really felt it during the baptism. Something happened," and I looked at them and I said, "Oh my gosh, you felt that too?"
Wow. Yeah. So the presence was
very real. Yeah, and so that was the point in my ministry life and in my personal life. That was a very critical point where I knew then it wasn't only out of, gospel stories or stories of the Old Testament, that involve miraculous healing, and from other faith traditions and religions, religious experiences that other people have had. It's not just, of course, Judeo-Christian in the focus. It's just it can happen anywhere, anytime. And I just happened to be, as far as I'm concerned, I just simply was the vessel that God used. Now, someone did ask me a very important question after all this happened, and I shared it. I shared the experience with the staff. And one of the questions that came out was, well, why is it that sometimes, if not rarely, God responds to a prayer and request for physical healing? That happens sometimes, and a lot of times it doesn't seem to happen.
That's a big question for folks, I would think.
Right, and there of course would be a whole other discussion about that.
Well, thank you for sharing that wonderful story. And it.
Well, you're welcome. It's always a blessing when I get to share it with anybody.
Well, yeah, it sounds like the blessings were going around in those moments, and you're paying it forward. I'm sure people listening were really touched and inspired by it. Not just the miracle, but also, the poignancy and the depth of the sorrow and trauma that a lot of families have to go through in that setting. There's a lot of people dealing with the death of a newborn or something close to that, and it's unimaginable for the rest of us who haven't gone through something like that.
And I could not agree more with my whole heart and soul, Cory, about that. And I mean, the truth is, for me, as a chaplain, for 7 years, as a full-time chaplain working in perinatal medicine, I was right there. I was in the trenches, at the bedsides, and in those very, very crushing, heart-wrenching, life-altering losses. And they are happening all the time. And it could be very early on in a pregnancy. It could be a miscarriage loss, such as what happened with my wife and I with our second pregnancy. Yeah. And these losses are just, they're life-altering. And in my experience of them, both as someone that went through it, but also for years as a chaplain at the bedside, these losses go beyond words, and they change our lives forever. There was a quote that I'll never forget. Other quotes within my journey as a perinatal chaplain that has always stuck with me. And I don't have I have it somewhere here in my office, but I don't have the person's name at the tip of my tongue. But the quote is that that babies' hands touch and change our hearts forever. And that is just, for me personally, that's how it feels. That, whenever any one of us is blessed to become pregnant, as soon as we know that, as soon as we hear the words, "you're pregnant," or we see the blue line on the pregnancy monitor or whatever, the thing that tests for it. But as soon as we really get it, that there's a little new life that has started inside of the mother, it happens really fast that we just fall in love with these precious new teensy weensy little infant lives. And it doesn't matter how big or how small the baby is, but we know we can feel it tremendously if we lose a baby. It feels like that baby's little hands have been around and placed around our hearts the whole time. And it's a feeling and an experience that you never forget it, of course. I remember with my wife and I, as soon as we found out that we were pregnant with our daughter, it didn't take long, once an initial shock, of realizing, wow, we're going to have a baby, then, you start thinking about, oh my gosh, first birthday or the first Christmas, or just, holding your baby for the first time and looking into her or his eyes. And that's what happens I think really for all of us when we find out that a pregnancy has started, and we really believe that we can anticipate holding that precious bundle of new life in our arms. And the sad and difficult reality is that what I learned as a chaplain in my studies and training in this area is that of all pregnancies that begin, there's roughly, I think it was around 25% or 30% of all conceptions never make it to life. There's some kind of like genetic anomaly or life-threatening problem with the pregnancy, and very often they will end on their own through miscarriage. But then at other times things get much more serious. And as a chaplain, of course, I have the privilege of journeying alongside of parents who were dealing with very, very painful diagnoses.
Yeah, so many are dealing with that trauma as you describe. And is there anything that you typically share? It seems as though just a caring presence is kind of often probably the most you can do in such a tragic situation as a chaplain visiting these people.
Yeah, that really is the main thing that I came to learn and value was offering a loving and sympathetic presence. I learned quickly that it was most important for me usually just to listen and to offer a compassionate response, of course. It could be something as simple as, I'm so sorry that your hopes and your dreams are not true in this case, or whatever it was. But I also learned not to say certain things.
Oh yeah.
As a Swedenborgian, I would never say something like, well, this was God's will. Because I just don't believe that an all-loving and wise being and God, I don't believe God ever plans for terrible, devastating things to happen to people. But I am completely convinced that even much more so than I think we're often able to feel and to know. I know that and feel that God is always with us. And from a purely divinely loving way, that God will always stay with us and will very gently, but very, very faithfully will help us through the minutes and through the hours, just day by day. When it comes to a big loss like that, or it could be something else, it could be the end of a marriage, or the loss of a great job that we've loved for years. My sense is, and my faith is that, God, that nothing can separate us from God, just as Paul wrote in his letters in the New Testament, that there's nothing on earth, in heaven or hell, that can separate us from the love of God. Now, does that mean that we're not in freedom, to try to turn away from God? Absolutely we can, And I've come to, as the years go by, more and more, I've come to deeply value and to cherish how much freedom that God gives each one of us, And I think for myself, at this point, this is just for me, but for me, the reason for that is because, God is love itself. And so when I look at my life journey and all the moments of when I really have been in a heartfelt, loving state of being towards someone, when I'm really full of that love, the last thing on earth that I would want to do would be to control or to dominate or to push someone else or some group of people in a direction that they don't want to go. And so that for me personally that's my truth at this point. And of course I didn't at all come up with that. This was a very important part of Emanuel Swedenborg's theology and the writings the books that he wrote, and how he talks about God being love itself and wisdom itself, and that this infinitely loving, wise being will always relate and work with us from love. And so that means God wants everybody, to connect with God and to have a mutually loving and wonderful relationship with God, but that the Lord never, ever will force someone into love or into relationship or into faith, That these are things that God, because of who and what God is, being love itself and wisdom itself, God will always protect and fully nurture and sustain my freedom, my internal spiritual freedom to choose, am I going to be a loving and supportive person tomorrow, or am I going to focus more on, let's say, selfish desires, or not being so compassionate, or just, kind of ignoring my relationship with God. That I believe that the Lord seriously is deeply protecting and fortifying that freedom at all times. Granted, it's obviously it would be a relative thing with each person. Like, for example, the kind of spiritual freedom and guidance and support that God gives to a child, let's say. Or let's say a child that's born into a really dysfunctional and perhaps abusive family. You know, I've talked with a bunch of people over the years who did grow up in families like that. And it's really amazing how often these adults who have survived those years, how often they would share with me these amazing experiences of how they really they felt this loving or divine presence. Or I remember one woman, she shared with me, she said she was 4 years old and her heart had been kind of hurt and crushed again by her parents for this or that reason. She went to her bedroom crying, she said, and as she was sitting on her bed crying, all of a sudden she saw Jesus appear, just standing right there in her bedroom. And she said it was totally unbidden. She was not praying for it, but there he was. And she said, you know, his presence and his energy and the look on his face was absolutely just so loving and so compassionate. And he said something to her. It was very brief, but it was something like, I am with you always, and I will always help you, or something like that. I mean, it was a really overt message. And she told me, this woman, and the woman that told me this, well, I won't name, she shared this with me when she was probably in her early 50s. And she said to me, she said, Kit, from that day on, and she said, I was only 4 years old when that experience happened. She said, from that day on, my feeling, or my feeling of security, or how did she put it? She said it was something like she just didn't feel as deep down afraid anymore. You know, and it wasn't that her life, you know, didn't have further difficult and challenging and or painful moments in it, but she said from that point on, it really was, life was qualitatively different.
Yeah, that makes sense. That's amazing.
Just to finish my thought on that, I really, from so many different conversations I've had with people, but then also in my privilege to do a lot of reading and studying of not only Swedenborg, but so many great writers and thinkers and theologians, I really, you know, do have that faith at this point. It's, I guess you could say, a belief or a trust that, you know, God is with each one of us in a very, very special way. Most of the time, it seems to be very invisible. But I do believe that God is really with each one of us, and that God is doing all kinds of very special things to protect us and to protect, you know, that deep down spiritual freedom, which enables each one of us at every moment of our lives, we can make big or little choices of, am I going to turn toward love, toward what's true? No. Am I going to turn toward trying to have faith? Or am I going to, you know, go in the other direction? And it may just be a really, like, simple choice of, like, as a teenager, you know, I remember times when I would choose to be more sympathetic and more compassionate, and then other days I just didn't really give a hoot. And I just would be more self-centered.
Yeah, that's the question we should ask ourselves as we move through life, right, in a reflective mode of really trying to discern our motivations and allow divinity to uplift the good in us, and it'll seem as though it's ourself. Yeah, it's quite the journey.
Yeah, it really is. Yeah, and I can certainly say, Cory, that it really has been one of my life's great joys to be able to talk with you about these things. And like when you were here visiting in LaPorte as an intern, and to hear your stories as well, and those amazing crossroads periods in I think really for all of us when we make some significant choices, and sometimes in my experience my choices were not so good, and that it resulted in a painful and difficult experience. But just like the prodigal son, which is one of my favorite Bible stories and parables that Jesus told. But just like the prodigal son, God is always willing, from a merciful place to work with us and to welcome us back, and really to help me to learn something important from the mistake or from the unhealthy choice that I may have made.
Yeah, it's amazing how God is so patient and kind and uplifting with us, even when we, make another poor decision. And as you were talking about how important freedom is to the higher power, to divinity in our lives, and even the physical creation around us, and how often that can lead to things that aren't quite pleasant, and often destructive when it comes to what humans can be about. And yeah, the Lord's still there, trying to uplift herself in a sense, in each moment, and in our hearts and in our circumstances.
Yeah, and that's so well said. It just puts me in complete awe of just how merciful and how loving and forgiving God is. Which that actually was the doorway for me into my first real full-blown what I would refer to as a dream vision that I had with Christ. It's a very long story, and I can't remember, Cory, if I've ever shared that with you.
You have. It's hard to forget the story. That's quite. Yeah.
So it's definitely too long to share with as much time as we have at this point. But that for me would be a crowning moment or example of when a human being, in this case it was me, when I totally felt like I didn't deserve any type of mercy and forgiveness, but that didn't stop God in any way, shape, or form. So the Lord is what she is, and I'm just so thankful that just the way that the divine person operates, and I just feel so lucky and so blessed that I've been exposed to a form of faith, and views about God that really are what, for me, I would say are truly healing and transformational, and to use a very traditional term, quite saving. But for me, that word, the word being saved, or that term, or to say that God is saving me, for me it really is. It's just like I had this wonderful fellow student in seminary named his name was Reverend Dick or Richard Marine, and he was actually a United Methodist ordained minister who came across Swedenborg's books at one point during his ordained years, and just became so enamored with them that he decided to move all the way to Boston from Montana. And he enrolled in our seminary for a whole year, if not more than a year. And he had this wonderful way of looking at salvation that I've never forgotten. And it is, when somebody asks him and they say, well, Dick, have you been saved? And his response is, oh, yes, every day.
It's a process.
That's my experience right there. That hits the nail on the head, as far as how just that's the way I find God working in my life, is that it's a daily divine work and a daily intervention, but most of which is completely invisible.
Yes, as far as we're typically concerned, right?
Right, exactly. Because we get, like this week, my ministry work has been quite extensive and very, very good. But most of the time I'm still dealing with a lot of issues and decisions or tasks, and so most of the time I'm just kind of oblivious to the actual divine intervention, I would say. The way that the Lord is just constantly guiding, really, shepherding in so many ways that I just am unaware of.
Well, I gotta say, you're quite inspiring in your ministry and your heartfelt work and wisdom. And I, as I said before, am greatly, astoundingly touched and thankful for your support, not just for me, but in each of your ministries. It sounds as though you really try to engage and uplift divine presence with people, no matter their creed or circumstances, knowing that the Lord saves every day, and that it's a process, and we're a part of that.
Amen on that. That's why, honestly, when my alarm goes off in the morning, unless I'm like really sick or something, I open my eyes and I look forward to the day, and that's the reason. Because I know, I really know that this all-powerful, loving, and wise being is always with us through thick or thin, and will simply never give up on us, and yet, will leave us free to make our choices.
That you said it, and I have to thank you again, and I have to thank all the people in our chat room chatting and real support of you and inspired by your sharing, and so thank you all. I'm not getting the warning that we're going to cut off, but we'll cut off in any second now. So thanks for blessing us, Kit.
Thanks for having me, Cory.
Well, we'll have to have you on soon and hear that other story.
Sounds good, my friend.
Oh, awesome. Well, go forth knowing you're loved.
Amen. Thanks again. It was a pleasure to have this time with all of you.
Bye.